Welcome, everyone. This is the July 24th, 2017 meeting of the Greenwich Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency. First item on the agenda is seating of alternates. There's only 6 of us tonight, so everyone is seated. The next 7 of us, no, 6 of us, right. Next is review and approval of the draft minutes of June 26, 2017. Has everyone received a copy and had an opportunity to look at the draft minutes? Are there any comments or questions on the minutes? No? May I have a motion, please?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Great, thank you. Next is the director's report. Patricia, if you would.
Okay, thank you. A quick update for Post Road Ironworks. We've had 2 mediated meetings, and we're scheduled to come back in August with the crew and have another one. So we'll see what that goes. There have been requests by our attorneys to say, hey, can we put off writing those briefs and see how this goes? And the response was nope. So we're still doing that. Our attorney is still doing that, and the trial is still scheduled for November. As we discussed at the last meeting, or I guess it was 2, the special meeting in June, we did go ahead and suspend the green sheet fee, so people seem to be pleasantly surprised, which, you know, somebody says keep your $30 is always quite nice. And Jennifer Turiano from the Greenwich Times, she did a nice write-up on our green sheets and other stuff. Unfortunately, she noted that we do about 1,000 green sheets a month, and I think BET would miss that 300,000, so, or 30,000 a month. That the 300 a year. So I did check with her. I think she's probably going to correct the online version, but what's in print is in print. So be it. Let's see. We also spoke in June with regards to the pond notifications. Oh, I forgot to print out what Doreen gave me, but I'll ask her to speak to it. We don't require permits for all pond applications. There's a system that was developed by the agency a number of years back. I'm not quite sure that it's the most effective way to be educating people on their land use practices and how they might be impacting their pond. So we talked about either doing away with the need to get a permit because the state permits it, so we are technically, you know, superseded by the state. But it's something that this agency chose to take on, so it's at your discretion either way. Or we could just do away with it and provide educational material. I think we can still go on somebody's property once we've been notified by the state that this permit application's been made. So we do have the opportunity to gather some information and give back site-specific information, or we could just have everybody come apply for a permit. It's not something we can approve at a staff level because it's in a wetland or a watercourse, which means it's not eligible for agent approval. So those would still have to come to the agency. Or, I mean, I suppose we could do something along declaratory ruling, which acknowledges they're conducting that activity without requiring a formal permit. And I think we would actually still be safe there because the state is actually the permitting authority on this one. So, Doreen, did you want to talk about the pros and cons that you had identified?
I basically pointed out what we look at and what the DEP looks at, and really we overlap on so many things. We don't really have any regulatory authority. We can go out there, we can recommend buffers. We do get a lot of pushback with those kinds of things. Not that we can't enforce them, but it's difficult sometimes. Another thing is that we generally tend to regulate the higher quality ponds. We want to protect them if there are no drinking watershed or if there's species of concern. But we don't do the lower quality if there's lawn right up to the pond, when really those would potentially be the ones that benefit more. What we could possibly do is a brochure that goes out to every homeowner that applies for chemical pond treatments. This way we're reaching everybody, not just the higher tier wetlands.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
So, I mean, again, I have an understanding that this was a topic of much conversation at one point for the agency, so in respect for all that went into that, I'm not sure if what we're getting subsequent to that is meeting the goals of that dialogue, or if there's something we can be doing better. As Doreen said, we're not in a position to require buffers, so are we is requiring a permit the best way to educate? And in sticking to the top tier ponds, is that the best strategy? Doreen, about how many pond permits do we do in a year, do you think?
I'd say we probably do maybe 20. We
20.
probably get in 75 for treatments through the town.
So there's a lot being left on the table for that one.
Yeah, I think the idea of sending out the brochure to all the pond applicants, it makes a lot of sense for that. At least if we can educate them on the, the value of the buffers and things such as that, it would be, it'd be helpful.
And Doreen has a wonderful list of the different chemicals and their unintended consequences that people may not be aware of. When the notification comes for the state permit, what people are intending to use as part of that, so we can customize that mailing to say, this is what you're proposing, you might want to think about these other things, and some additional education material. And if we're only sacrificing 20 permits a year, fee-wise, we're not giving away too much, which would be a concern.
Yeah,
So we want to,
I'm glad that we have that alternate list, though. So you're talking about toxicity
Yes.
and then different approaches. That's pretty important, too, because a lot of people just overlook that, I think. And if we provide that list, they might get it and say, oh, we could use this. Let's do it, instead of using X, which is incredibly toxic, or whatever it's doing for the ecology. Yeah, that'd be good to include.
so
Okay.
you want me to just keep going, or you want
Sure.
to deal with that later, or is there consensus? I'll just keep going. We can circle back on that. Brian and Doreen and I had a meeting today with legal counsel to firm up protocols and expectations with regards to violations. I think we've discussed some level of frustration when something is sent to legal. We didn't really have an understanding of when we could expect a letter to go out. We had been copying the entire file and sending it down to legal, which seemed excessive to generate a letter. Now, that's more in keeping with when you're going to court and you have a return of record. So we confirmed with legal today that, no, just the order, the initial violation write-up would be enough to get them going. And they confirmed their turnaround time should be 2 weeks. So I think it was a very good opportunity to have all of us participating at once, so we all have the same understanding of expectations, and for us to be able to reiterate the value in having a turnaround time that's reasonable to keep that momentum going, since pretending we don't exist is often a strategy used to get around us. And we don't really have that many. I think, Doreen, you'd said we do a few a year. But it does seem to be, in looking back at some of the older violations that we've had, what did happen when it went down to legal seemed to be a gap. So I think this will help. So at the last meeting, we discussed briefly the releasing of the bonds, that on every meeting, we've got the list of bonds, and then the agency makes a motion to release those bonds. So where does that practice come from? Is it necessary for the agency to make that motion, or is that our practice? So we went back through the files in our office, went to finance, went to everybody who we would normally deal with in releasing the bonds, and there appears to be no requirement to have bonds released by the agency. I would respectfully request that the agency authorize those releases, that the staff, allow the staff to do those releases. We have had more than one person come to me like, oh, I've got to wait a month. And so they wait a month, and then it comes back up there, and then Kazi prepares the paperwork, and then it goes out to finance. So there can be a lag time that I can identify with people who want, need to get some money back on a faster turnaround. So if it's, we can continue to provide a list for the agency, so you all can be kept in the loop. It doesn't seem like, I can't recall a time where we've ever discussed the bonds.
Right.
It's always seemed to be just a pro forma. So perhaps that's something the agency would be comfortable.
So moved.
Done, okay.
All in favor?
Okay. And to Elliot's question, why do we sign the agenda? No reason for that either that I can find.
One less thing for me to do, I guess. Okay.
One less thing for the dig out the pile. And then lastly, tomorrow is my last Six Sigma training. So I know for all the corporate types here that Lean Six, oh, that's old news. Apparently it's coming to a government building is newer news. The governments tend to be lax in those. So I think I'm appreciative of the perspective it gave me on looking at things and saying, yeah, why do we do this? From a customer's perspective, is there something better we can do? Maintaining our records, the integrity of the agency. How do we communicate? Is there some way better? Jay and I had conversations this afternoon about paper, all this paper. Is there something we can put out on a trial run that might lessen that load? So, and happy to say that the things that we've been doing over the past couple of years, didn't know it had that neat little name, Lean Six Sigma, but we've been making some changes that would certainly fit into that category. So, pleased in hindsight to see where we're heading in the right direction.
What's that?
So that's all.
Okay.
Okay, you want to talk about the ponds again?
Certainly.
Okay. If we don't have any authority and we don't have any regulatory responsibility, then there's no need for us to review
Right.
ponds as far as I'm concerned. I would like to know, however, what stuff is being put into the waters of Greenwich on a regular basis. So if you're going to approve the ponds, or at least give us a report on what you know about what's going into the ponds, I think that would be a good solution myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would tend to agree on that. I think part of it was just so that we had a record of which ponds were being treated in the town. So,
And that we get,
and that we'll continue to get that.
yes, because every pond, it's a state requirement that the town be noticed when application's made to the state, so we get that.
Okay, there's another thing here. Relative to legal counsel, there was a second paragraph in your report that I think we got sort of skipped over.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot all about that. So, so is the consensus on the pond, where are we with that?
I think the consensus on the pond was that all the heads are nodding
Okay,
up and
all the
down.
heads are nodding, okay, thank you.
Okay.
So if July 5th was a deadline for somebody to submit something, and Doreen and I know that this has been a challenging case, we wait until July 24th to say this particular project is 3 weeks overdue, and we don't think that they're going to be doing anything about it based on our experience with them to this point. In discussing with legal today, we don't have, the agency doesn't have to make a motion to send it to legal. The staff could make that decision on our own and save that time of waiting for a meeting in order to get it moving. But that's a comfort level piece for the agency. And as always, anything that the agency delegates to staff, the agency will be kept apprised of those things.
Okay.
How do you feel about that?
Sounds-
Okay.
Yeah.
How about if we do it on an exception basis, where since these are almost always the result of a cease and correct, where we have authorized certain things to be done, including notification of legal, what if we do it on the basis that if you don't go to legal, you tell us why,
Well, okay.
and only right? And tell us when you've gone, and then tell us why you've chosen certain ones to not go.
And there are those. I mean,
Yeah.
there's ones where there's
Exactly.
things that come up
You know
and we
that
find
somebody
it to be
got sick
legitimate.
and they're about to.
Very good. That's terrific.
Okay.
Is that okay with you, Stephen?
I missed it. Can you say it again?
Yeah, I was asking that, since we authorize going to legal when we deal with a cease and correct, that we be informed first of when they have gone, just on a notification basis, but more specifically, where they choose not to go, why they've chosen not to go.
Why legal is chosen?
No, why we chose not to go to legal on a specific thing 2 weeks after.
We being
we missed
staff?
deadline.
Staff, right?
Yeah.
So,
Maybe that just becomes part of the director's report then,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
I was gonna say, it's,
a legal subhead.
when I was in Wilton, it was normal that the violations that were ongoing appeared on every agenda, and an update was given. That was pretty normal. It wasn't just new notices of violations or cease and correct orders. So I don't know if the agency has an interest in hearing progress more frequently, or you just want a written report of it and ask a question.
Well, I think if it's just listed on the agenda, then we can ask a question.
Okay.
I mean,
If it's been there.
Should we have a discussion as to what criteria are going to be employed for staff's discretion?
So my take on sending it to legal is if somebody has received a directive, they've passed on it, given that pass, it's at a point where I feel, in consultation with Doreen, that this project has now it's stalled. People can be fairly clear at times that they're not doing any, or they can just be quiet and they just don't respond. My take on violations, cease and correct orders, is if you're making forward progress, even if it can be frustratingly slow at times, I'm not sending it to legal. If you're still plodding forward, sometimes things are just more complicated, or people have personal situations, those I wouldn't be interested in sending to legal, but the ones where they just go silent or just keep disregarding the directives, you get a sense of that this isn't going the way you want it to go. As Doreen said today, there's just a few, 1 to 3 that get sent down in any given year. And I, in my short time here, haven't felt that, geez, I wish we were sending more.
You wish what? I couldn't hear you.
I think that we're doing just fine. I don't think we need to be sending a bunch down there. Those are really, I would save those for the ones where you're just, they're just ignoring the commission.
I'm not trying to be overly analytical about it, but it is an administrative agency. So you have to be guided by, I think, some level of objectivity and criteria, so that somebody doesn't, in some circumstance, say that was subjective or even arbitrary. I mean, just to say, my gut tells me we've gone as far as the road will take us sounds a bit too vague.
So is it a missed planting plan date, or is it a missed?
So all I'm
It
saying,
wouldn't even be that
maybe
low,
we should just
threshold,
think
yeah.
about a little bit more specific criteria, put it in some sort of writing, circulate it to the agency and say, yeah, that sounds like a fair way to go, for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, I guess I would tend to agree. If we're only seeing 2 or 3 a year, we can probably establish that criteria prior to.
I mean, there is going to be
prior to doing
some subjectivity,
Yeah.
but if we can just say, after 3 attempts or after no response to 2 or 3 notices, at least we have some
Something,
criteria.
okay. And Bill can work on that.
I'd go, actually, I would go one step further. Pat, if we really are only seeing 2 or 3 a year, bring them to us.
Okay, we can do that too.
And if it were 20 or 30, I would say, okay, we have criteria. But if it's really only 2 or 3, we might, the week or 2 or 3 that you're going to wait to get our approval isn't going to make any difference in the long run.
Okay, that's fine too.
Okay.
I think if we
Unless
have
it-
some of the more difficult ones that we are anticipating being ignored, I think we would know it at one meeting to say, hey, there's
Could
going to be a
also-
deadline before the next meeting.
Right.
If they miss
It
that,
could
are
also
you
be the
okay?
executive committee, it could be an email exchange between the three, if we're trying to do that.
Can I just revisit your first point on the mediation? I don't know, do we have to go to any, is that privileged in any way, or can we discuss the mediation?
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest discussing it.
I still am a little unclear as to, when we attend the mediations, what contributions we make. I mean, where does one mediate a decision
Right.
of the agency?
I
And
believe
who else
that
is in attendance there? So what is
So-
going on?
Judge Montalese has been assigned as the mediator, so these are the judges who are spending less time.
I understand the process. I'm
Okay.
just
Oh, the process.
wondering, what is the topic? What's the substance? I mean, we're not in a, I've never really, I can't even conceptualize how an agency participating in a mediation that's already ruled, it's not like we have an open application.
That's correct.
Where we can reopen an application. The only thing we can do is be bound by the judge's decision and then review it again if we're ordered to do that.
Correct.
So what's our contribution to these mediations? And if we're not, then what's being discussed in these meetings?
So by way of example, if the agency denied something, saying, it's too close to a wetland, the buffer is too valuable, the wetland's too valuable, then there would be a discussion, how much is appropriate from the applicant's side, what do they see they're willing to give? So it's my representation of the direction that I think that the agency would be looking towards. It is not binding. I'd say, actually, we've not had any wetlands discussions. It's all been planning and zoning discussions.
No, but just take your example, for example.
Yes.
If that were to come up in a mediation in the context of some resolution by parties other than the agency,
Right.
it's just a guidance, I guess.
That's correct.
It has no impact at all on our decision.
That's correct. So in lots of ways, it's kind of like a pre-application meeting. Say, hey, we were thinking this, and I say, well, this is the red flag, except this, I have a denial to say these are the red flags. What needs to be done to resolve them? Which is, the same thing I would be doing in a pre-application meeting. And that has no more binding on the agency.
Let me ask it another way. Let's say all the participants in the mediation agree.
Yep,
They come to a conclusion and they say, you know what,
this all sounds good.
yeah, we think that,
Make an application.
a new application.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All
So
right.
in that regard, it is just like a pre-application meeting. Even
But it has
the
nothing-
judge,
It has nothing to do with the application per se, or whether we acted arbitrary or
Nope.
improperly. It's just a guidance for going forward in the future.
judge certainly expresses some opinions of what, through the denial, what he thinks the stronger points and the lesser points might have been.
And the parties to the mediation is P and Z, Wetlands, and the applicant?
Correct.
There's no participation at all of the interveners or,
Now, I suppose they could have, but they didn't.
okay, so they're not party to any of the
Nope.
mediation?
No, they're not.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There's,
It's not really
it's an
a
awkward
mediation. It's-
Yeah,
thing.
Yeah.
It is, it's a reasonably awkward discussion to go through, but that's what we're required to do.
Okay.
All right, fair enough. Anything else, Pat?
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay. Any other business to discuss? Okay. Okay, moving on to the public session. It is 7:30 on the dot, so we're good. We have 3 consent approvals tonight, 2017-070, 23 Hurlingham Drive, 2017-081, 200 Guards Road, and 2017-087, 200 Guards Road as well.
So I would say for the 200 Guards Road, it is the guidelines of the agency that you get 1 dock per property. So this doesn't meet that particular guideline. The second dock is being requested by the owner of an easement on 200 Guards. And given the size of those properties, they far exceed the separating distance than we would see like on Myannis Pond. So I think that an exception to the agency's guidelines is appropriate.
Okay. Very good. Any questions or comments on the consent approvals? Someone like to make a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. Pending applications, 2017-045, 86 Cutler Road. Mastro Giacomo Engineering, PC for Cutler Road LLC for construction of a new single-family residence. Driveway, pool house drainage, grading, and landscaping 10 feet from wetlands. Bob Clausy, please.
Okay, I think Pat's going to do the presentation since she did the most recent staff reports.
Okay.
Since the last meeting of the agency, a planting plan was supplied by the applicant, and it had 49 trees and several stations of shrubs proposed. The size of the trees were much smaller than the agency would normally be looking at. So my lead question was whether or not what was the rationale used by the applicant to come up with the proposed plan. So in response to that, Ms. Shalafo and I and Lindsay Tomazeski from our office met out on site on a very hot morning, despite it being 9 o'clock in the morning, and battled our way to the undisturbed wetland area to the rear of this property. Looked at a sample test plot and counted the mature trees, and that was anything over the 4 inches in size, to get an estimation of what the restored area could look like and get some substance to the plan. Based off of that discussion and a recognition that there needs to be some exposed area adjacent to the retaining wall, we came up with 88 planting stations, was what Ms. Shalafo's most recent plan consists of. And the size of the trees was increased to something that is more consistent to what the agency is used to seeing, which would be 1 to 1.5 inches and 2 to 2.5 inches. Also, an accommodation for the fence that's out there now is only 4 feet tall, which will not deter a deer. So the plan does include amending that fence to make it at least 6 feet to deter the deer. And there was a couple other minor issues. Retaining wall on the north and southern property lines are actually on the property line. So I think that that's something that the property owner, I mean, you physically can't build on your property line without trespassing on your neighbor's property. So that's sort of an issue there that has to be dealt with. And then the construction staging is really too generic, and that needs to be tidied up for before the project goes forward. So I have provided conditions of approval. Tonight is the last night that the agency has to hold this hearing, or the meeting. I would say also that the DPW has a fairly substantial level of inadequacies associated with the drainage plan, which is something that I would prefer not to have that way, but it is by and large away from the wetland. The engineer who's working on that is perhaps not as familiar with the town's drainage plan, so there's a lot of pieces that need to be worked through. So if the agency did not find making the drainage plan or acceptance by DPW a condition of approval to be an acceptable alternative, it would have to be denied because we are out of time. I have spoken with Scott Marucci of DPW. He feels comfortable that he could make conditions of approval would be fine. You'd also have to get an approval from him before you can get a building permit. So there are ways to deal with that. The agent or the applicant has to, if the agency chooses to go forward, the applicant needs to realize if the drainage plan does wind up being something that's substantially different and includes regulated activities that were not part of this plan, then a new application would have to be filed. So that's just an open risk there. So you'll note in the special conditions that they are broken out specifically for the wetland restoration and then the residential redevelopment. This is a violation, so it's a combination order/permit. So the wetland restoration aspects have got to be done by the date certain, independent of whether the house redevelopment goes forward or not. Bob, you had a couple of other points that you had picked up on?
You know, I think a precondition of the permit, if it's granted, should also include a detail for the retaining wall, the western retaining wall, which is quite close to the wetland. A condition, not a, okay, I'll stick with the preconditions. As Pat said, DPW approval of the drainage plan is a precondition if you choose to do that. And I frankly, personally, I think that would be reasonable in this case because all of the drainage facilities are within the construction envelope defined by the retaining walls. And as Pat said, if there's some strange thing that happens and they have to go further, closer to the wetland, they need to make a new application. As part of the restoration, I think Special Condition 7 should include a statement as to the fill removal needing to be supervised by a qualified professional, preferably I think specifically a soil scientist, so that we're sure that the fill has been removed to expose the native soil surface. And that is also important because further on there's a condition that the actual wetland line be delineated and added to a record plan so that there's, going forward, we have a survey accurate wetland location on the property. The other thing would be that once the restoration's done and the 5-year hold on the bond and the survival rate has been confirmed, the chain link fence ought to be removed. So those are my additional comments.
And if you'll notice, the bond is a stepped down release, given that the 5 years is a long period of time. And if the agency does go forward, I would suggest that it be a two-parter. One, the agency make a motion for the order, and then it's secondarily a permit for the house based on the conditions, and staff can sort that out. But I don't, I'm uncomfortable with the order portion being buried in a permit, and I don't know legally if something wasn't done, if we're putting ourselves in a precarious situation, not having a distinct order.
Hello. Tracy Shalafo, landscape architect for Cutler Road, LLC. Just going to summarize the changes between the last plan you saw and the plan you see before you tonight. In response to items on the staff report, item 1, A, B, C, and D, the number of proposed wetland restoration plantings were increased based upon a grid that we mapped out in the existing undisturbed wetlands, as Pat mentioned. And based on this, we found that there are 14 trees considered substantial within that area. And the plan you see before you is derived exactly from those numbers, 88 stations, where for each station, either 1 tree or 3 shrubs will count for a station. So we're creating a substantial canopy right away within the wetlands. I'd like to note there's the existing 4-foot chain link fence back there, and we would be extending it to a minimum of 6 feet in height. And we do call for removal of that fence and the footings after the plantings are established and to be disposed of off-site. I'd also like to point out that the plantings are deer-resistant as well. There's no such thing as deer-proof, as we all know, but these plantings are as resistant as we can get, so hopefully long-term success will be ensured. Item number 9 under planting notes states that wetlands and buffer below retaining wall shall be monitored for regrowth of invasive vegetation twice per year for a period of 5 years. So previously that had been, I think, a period of 3 years, so we've increased that to 5 years based upon staff comments. I believe that covers the planting restoration changes at this time. Are there any questions?
See, we in the staff report, the reporting requirements as identified in item 7 are slightly different than what you've got. It's a little more intense up front.
Okay.
Quarterly, and then dropping down to lesser frequency as time moves on.
So quarterly initially, we're in agreement with that. We can make that adjustment to the plan to coordinate with the staff report.
Pat, is there any any concern about if the chain link is going all the way to the ground in terms of transit of animals? Is there a...
Given that it's going to be coming out at the end of the monitoring period, I would just leave well enough alone at this point.
So no,
it is so grossly ensconced with growth right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It's been there for a while. 5 more years isn't going to make too much of a difference.
Is it going to
2 years, right?
harm anything?
Fence,
Okay.
I think fence comes out at 5.
Very
something.
good. Any other questions or comments for the applicant on this? Are there public questions or comments?
I
on this?
have one question for Ms. Shalafo. In your experience, is a 6-foot deer fence effective? Or I usually see deer fences that I put my hand up and I can barely touch the top. They're about 8 feet tall.
It depends upon the animal's approach to the area, I find. And given the density of the adjacent woodlands, I think it would be very awkward for them to leap 6 foot. If we really want to be safe, we could say 7 to 8 foot for that extension on the fence. Again, most of the plants are deer resistant, but in order to keep them from getting in there and pulling or rubbing on the plants, we could consider just making that extension a bit taller, 7 to 8 feet.
Yeah, I don't think your incremental cost is going to be that great to just have it slightly taller.
That are safe,
You know.
yes.
So, okay, 7 to 8 feet.
Bob, didn't you raise an issue about the retaining walls, but I don't know if they've been addressed.
Right, well, that's what the engineer is here right now.
Good evening, Michael Masterjock, the engineer for the project. What we have obtained, we got one letter from one neighbor that's giving us permission to go onto their property and use a 3-foot strip of land to construct a wall, and then we'll restore it. We have also gotten a verbal permission from the other neighbor to the north, same thing.
Okay.
Go on, we can use their land to build a wall and then restore it back to its natural.
And that's the owners of the property or the renters of the property?
The owners. The owners.
Bill DeAndrea had contact. Is he, do you know what his connection is?
The property owner actually spoke, I think, to Bill, and he was getting in touch with the owner, and everything seemed to be okay on their end. So,
Okay, good.
and as far as for the staging, we've revised everything to take care of, to make it more elaborate for this type of project as well. And I've been in touch with engineering already to go and meet with them to review their comments. That way I can get them whatever other information they require.
Well, is it going to be something that you can provide before site work goes any further as far as a detail for that western retaining wall? I mean, the reason I'm asking repeatedly about this is right now there's maybe 10 feet of fill over that area where the wall's going to go.
Right.
And the wall's only going to be 5 feet high. So are you going to go all the way through this, what appears to be largely organic fill to hit?
We've designed a little larger footing. That way we don't have to go all the way down to try to soften the cost. I believe on the latest set of drawings, there was details for both the extension of the existing wall at the front of the property and also the new wall at the rear of the property.
Okay.
The wall that you're referring to, is that detail A on the plans?
I believe so, yes, I believe so.
As I'm looking at it, it's showing a 14-foot face.
Well, 14-foot exposed face because they're lowering the grade on that side. But then the wall extends higher above grade just for privacy. The retained height is roughly around 8 feet.
The lowered portion is on the wetland side?
Yes.
So going down 10 feet. Okay.
Okay.
Does that include the revision to make it explicit in special condition number 7 that supervision also pertains to the soil excavation, not just the planting?
Oh, sorry. The residential development piece of it, make a motion to approve with the clarification that this is contingent upon DPW stormwater approval or drainage plan approval, and that any significant changes that have the potential to impact wetlands or watercourses will come back as a new application.
And also removal of the chain link fence after the,
Right, and the removal,
But,
I think we have that in
yeah,
here.
that's in the record.
Yep. Is there a second on that piece of it? Okay. All in favor? All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, moving along. Application 2017-048, 32 Hedifrid Road, SE Minor and Company, Inc., for Pasquale and Rosina Iachetta for installation of restoration plantings and grading in wetlands. Doreen, please.
Okay, so this was a violation that you heard last month. A wooded wetland that's located at the front of the property had been cleared of vegetation, and fill was brought in to raise the grade. As recommended at the last agency meeting, a revised plan has been provided that removes the fill and restores the original depth to the wetland. The size and number of trees has also been increased as required, but the trees have been planted in the upland review area. And they should be planted within the wetland to restore the previously wooded character. There is deep fill that was also found to the rear of the property that is proposed to be pulled back. They'll be restoring the original grade there and stabilizing it with turf. An issuance of an order is recommended with the conditions that are part of the staff report.
Thank you, Doreen. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the agency and staff. Larry Liebman from SE Minor representing the applicant. We have no objections or comments to anything that was requested from staff. We did what we said we were going to do, revise the plans, pull the fill out. As far as the relocation of the plants, we'll relocate them in final construction drawings. The way that that's going to really work is when the plants arrive, we will inspect them and make sure that they're the right plants and that they're healthy, and we'll place them where they need to be appropriately.
Okay, fair enough. Any questions for Mr. Liebman on this application? Any public questions or comments? Would someone like to make a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Yep. All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is 2017-078, 40 Locust Road, Soundview Engineers and Land Surveyors for Sanli Zhang and Yanping Li. Hopefully I said that right. For construction of a new barn, greenhouse, and animal coops in wetlands. Mr. Clausy, please.
You're going to get Mrs. Sesto again.
Oh, that's right.
Mr. Clausy was on vacation.
That's right.
At the last meeting, there was substantial discussion with regards to the fill that was proposed within the paddock areas in order to make them more accommodating to the horses. The agency requested alternatives be sought that did not include fill. There's also concern that the amount of fill would actually end up filling the wetlands to such a point that they would no longer be considered wetlands. So to that end, the applicant has revised the plans. I met on site with Mr. Finkbeiner, and the plans now reflect that no fill for the paddock areas is being sought. However, the berm to protect the pond is still being proposed. Other questions and comments, the construction sequence has a carryover from, I think, from when the house plan came through. It just needs to be addressed. The roof drains that were approved with the house redevelopment do not discharge as approved, but they discharge substantially closer to the wetland, so those should be pulled back. The berm, there is information about, I think it was a Rutgers report that was provided to me with regards to the value of having a wider vegetated buffer adjacent to paddocked areas and watercourses. And I don't know that we discussed of this berm what its vegetative cover was, and for it to really work as a filter, the planting associated with it on either side should be a robust grass.
Grass, yes.
Yeah.
Grass is the key word.
Grass, yes, not mowed, but good tall, good stuff. So with those pieces in mind, there are recommendations for the agency to acknowledge the as-of-right pieces to this, and as well as issue a permit for the berm, the generator, the removal of the generator, and the septic system would all be components that would be regulated.
Okay. Thank you,
Missing
Pat.
Propane tank they're removing?
Oh, propane tank. I said generator,
Well,
removal of a
they're
generator.
removing a generator and a propane.
Okay, then.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
Pete Finkbeiner, drainage engineer. I need to be clear for the record that I'm no longer associated with Soundview.
Oh, okay.
But I am here representing my client, Jack. We would like to move forward this evening. Jack would like to be a gentleman farmer in northern Greenwich. He bought this horse farm. The barn is rotting away, has been for some time. He'd like to build a new barn, new greenhouse, small duck coop, a small chicken coop, and take down the old barn and put up new paddock fencing. But we've removed all of the soil disturbance we previously had. There's no references to filling or leveling. And we do have several enhanced water quality issues that we're offering. We'd like to move forward if everybody's in agreement.
Thank you. I had just one question, general question regarding the robust grassed berm. And that would be, is there a stipulation that this is not going to be a grazing area? Because that would essentially, I mean, that grass will look really tasty to a horse, and they'll graze and relieve themselves right on the berm and into the pond. So
technically, the berm will be just outside the paddock fencing,
Right.
so I presume it'll be beyond the reaches of the horse's
right,
muzzle.
as long as they're, assuming that they don't extend beyond the paddock.
Yes.
Right.
Understand, we started with, my vision of what Bill Kenny was trying to convey to me was something like chicken wire, quarter-inch chicken wire. You put that along the bottom of all the fences so it catches all the manure from the runoff. And we ran into trouble with fencing blocking the little critters, so
Right.
instead of the fencing, we came up with this grass berm idea, and just a little retention type thing to keep the floating material from getting to the pond.
Okay, fair enough. Any agency questions on this? You look pensive, Pat.
Me?
Yeah.
Ooh, no.
Okay. Any public questions or comments? No? Would someone like to make a motion, please?
Motion to approve.
Is there a
Second.
Mr. Benton seconds. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, 2017-080, 293 Lake Avenue, Lot 2, SE Minor and Company, Inc. for 297 Lake Avenue LLC for construction of a new family residence, driveway, parking court, pool drainage, grading, and landscaping 6 feet from wetlands. Are we doing a continuation on this?
Okay. Let's see, so the agency has discussed this one time, and then the applicant requested a carryover at our last meeting in order to deal with some DPW requests pertaining to revisions in Chapman Lane specifically. I don't know that those have been resolved, but in looking at the requests that DPW was making of the applicant pertaining to Chapman, and then some minor things associated with the on-site drainage, none of those seem to be issues of wetland concern. So at the last, my staff report of July 24, 2017. Geez, I did this, boy, my mind is floating. There are suggested conditions of approval. And this, really, there's no new information since that June meetings. We were pretty good shape at that time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Liebman?
Okay, thank you.
You're good? Okay.
I don't have your report of July 3rd.
Should have been in your folder. I put it in the folder.
July 17th?
July 17th. I don't even have the 17th.
Do y'all have your folders tonight?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that are out of,
So I can run through the list. It is fairly standard.
I use my buddies here.
You're going to use your buddies? Sorry, I missed you there, Elliot. And it's July 24th?
No, it's July 17th.
Yep. So it probably looks pretty similar. The requirement for final plans,
Okay.
retail estimate for the bond, $5,000 bond plus 20%, filing of declaration, bright orange barrier at perimeter of work area, the packet for the homeowner describing components of the stormwater system and environmentally friendly lawn care, a bond period of 2 years. Compacted soil shall be uncompacted, and that shall be verified by the engineer, who shall also certify that the drainage system was constructed in accordance with the plans. Oh, there's what Larry's got there. Land record notification for licensed professional to inspect the system. As-built survey, no backwash per health department regulations for the pool, and fencing shall be installed with 6-foot gap unless it conflicts with the building code, plus the standard conditions.
Okay.
So moved.
Well, any public questions or comments on this application? No? We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
We keep writing the same ones over, and we gotta mix it up for us.
Okay. Next is 2017-082, 600 North Street, lot number 2. Eric VP Brower, AICP for JZ Investments LLC for construction of a new family residence, septic, driveway drainage grading, and landscaping 0 feet from wetlands. This is you.
At the last meeting of the agency, Bob reviewed the file, and there were several outstanding issues. Let's see, running through the memorandum, information on the stream lacked detail. Detail has been provided since that time. The retaining wall detail was submitted, which shows the base of the retaining wall going back into the slope to minimize disturbance downslope of that retaining wall. It has been pulled back slightly. There was a discrepancy between 2 sets of information. It has been pulled back to the greater of the 2 to allow for passage down below it in construction. The phasing plan does not correlate to the extent necessary with the erosion sedimentation control plans. There's much too much potential for disturbed land to drain and contribute to too small an area of erosion sedimentation control, silt fence primarily. The plan has been updated to show additional layers of silt fence mid-slope as appropriate. These comments actually pertain to lots 2 and 3, so I don't want to repeat myself for lot 3. So this is all pertains to both. The various leaching fields and infiltrators are now protected with construction fence to prevent those areas from being trafficked erroneously. We also have check dams in the driveway to keep that flow from being concentrated. The phasing plan lacked details to distinguish between each phase. This is it's a lot going on in these small lots. Some coordination will be occurring between the 3 pieces per the subdivision approval, but then there'll be individual activities. More information has been provided on that. Let's see, and at the last meeting, Mr. Clausy had asked that the applicant revisit the planting plan that was proposed entirely on Lot 2 and have that repositioned in this area that stretches between 2 and 3, which has been the case. And a letter from Chris Allen of Land Tech, who had submitted comments for the agency at the last meeting. He has re-reviewed the plans, and all of his concerns have been addressed as well. So approval of the application is recommended, and conditions of approval are in place for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Welcome.
Good evening, Eric Brower on behalf of the applicant. I think Pat summarized very well where we stand. We were able to get a set of plans following her July 17th report, which she was referencing, and I appreciate the turnaround time on pretty short notice. So I think we'll be able to work through the details as part of the permit.
Okay.
So we have no objections to any of the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. Brower on this application from the agency? No? Are there public questions or comments on this application? Would someone like to make a motion? I'm sorry?
Move to approve.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jander made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to application 2017-083, 600 North Street, Lot 3. Again, Eric Brower, AICP for JZ Investments, LLC, for construction of a new family residence, septic, driveway, drainage, grading, and landscaping 35 feet from wetlands.
As I stated, the comments that I made for Lot 2 pertain to Lot 3. I don't know that we need to state any more than that.
Okay. Very good. And your recommendation is the same?
That's correct, and conditions of approval are provided for your consideration.
Okay, very good. Anything to add to her comments, Mr. Brower?
Nope, same as Lot 2. We're fine with the recommendations. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any agency questions or comments on this particular lot? Any public questions or comments? Okay, I will make a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, on to new applications to review. We have 2017-089, 9 Blind Brook Lane, SE Minor, Incorporated, for Philip and Laura Schachter for dredging a concrete-lined pond, stream bank stabilization and replacement of a drainage pipe along the eastern portion of the property.
I'll do this one. This is a very modest dredging application. 25 cubic yards is what they estimate they'll need to remove from this small pond. And following the initial review, the applicant was quite responsive to comments they got from staff and added a nice planting plan to restore a non-turf fringe around the pond and a portion of the brook that feeds the pond. So I think that overall this is going to be a nice improvement to the wetland and watercourse on this property, and I recommend the agency issue a permit with the conditions in the staff report.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Welcome.
The record.
You've been representing the applicant from SE Minor. I second that motion.
Anything
And
to add on
the
this,
record
Pat?
should reflect that Jay Schondorf did make a site inspection.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Jay. Great. Any agency comments for Mr. Leitman on this application? Any public questions or comments? Would someone like to make a motion, please? Stefan made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Jay seconds. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, 2017-090, 090, 636 Lake Avenue, SE Minor, Inc. for 636 Lake Avenue LLC for redevelopment of a single-family residence, garage, pool, patio, grading, landscaping, and drainage 2 feet from wetlands. Ms. Sesto.
Okay, Mr. Schondorf was also at this site this afternoon. This is a straightforward application to demolish the existing home and redevelop it principally within the same development area as the existing home. Very little change, if any. The property has a pond, which is an expanded portion of Horseneck Brook. Pretty solid vegetation around the pond. Up here, there's a bit of knotweed, and then one direct access to the pond. Down here, there's some neat little paths that come at the pond from an angle, which are terrific if you don't want to see geese on your property. In looking at the past aerials, I noticed that there was a substantial difference between 2008 and 2013. The aerial was attached to the staff report, and you can readily see the difference in the extent of lawn just in this area here. The lawn has been expanded, and five, it looks like, evergreen trees were planted at that point. So that information was conveyed to the applicant, and I'm hoping that they will speak to that this evening. Overall, the landscape overview plan does provide a positive wetland and pond buffer modifications. There is a proposal to take care of the knotweed and other invasives, which is a terrific piece. Any paths leading to the water, and some of them were shown with a straight shot. Again, that is not beneficial for deterring geese. So that would be good to rethink that. Do you have something coming up? Oh, thanks. Oh, that's what I gave him. Hey. So overall, I think it is a straightforward redevelopment of the project. I'm interested to see what the applicant revisions that they have brought for us this evening. And if the project approves, meets the agency's standards, then conditions of approval have been provided.
Thank you, Pat.
Good evening. Thank you very much, everybody. Larry Liebman again from SE Minor. With me this evening is John Conti, landscape architect, Danielle Wadier, the builder of the project, and we think as far as the landscaping, we responded relatively very, very quickly to, okay, this is what it is. There is a substantial portions of knotweed, and if you went there today, and winged euonymus, et cetera, so on and so forth, that the applicant has agreed to be removed by hand to go and do it. We were talking today, John and I were talking about how are we going to do the knotweed, and we're going to do the cutting it, cracking it when it first comes up, dropping the rodeo or Roundup into it with the paintbrush, and it's going to take years until the knotweed is completely eradicated. But if you've been to the site, and you can see it, that it is a fairly substantially landscaped site. It has a few access points to the lake, as opposed to immediately across the lake where they have grass and along the whole entire process.
And a deer fence, and a goose fence.
What? And
a goose fence.
Yes, and a huge fence. So what we think, we really believe that and I'll let John Conti talk about the landscaping that he's proposing, because it's really a lot more things going on.
Thanks, and talk to you guys. So, first of all, Ms. Sesto, your comments, I think, were right on. We appreciate them, and with regard to the shape of the beds, we definitely have pulled that lawn way back from the line that it is right now. I think it's well in excess of 5,000 square feet of pachysandra and lawn that's there now that are being removed. The discrepancy area that I think we're referring to in the photographs that we sent out really comes down to this little 1,500 square foot pocket. When I superimpose the photograph to the site plan, that's the line of that bed from the 2008 picture, which personally I don't think was of significant benefit. What we've done, which is very different than what I can gather from that 2008 picture, is added a far more diverse and varied planting plan. We're adding literally thousands of herbaceous plants, woody stemmed shrubs, native flowering trees, evergreen trees, and shade trees. So we're creating a much more diverse habitat. But this is also a large house, and the proportion, the landscape architect part of me really does want to provide a little bit of an expansive lawn around that. So this view is the best view of the lake in this direction, and this curve, I really would rather not just stamp it back down to exactly where it was in 2008. I feel that we've provided far better buffer than what was ever there. So I'm pushing back a little bit to see if the board might agree with me that the far more extensive planting way outweighs this 1,500 square feet. As far as the curvilinear paths go, very happy to increase the curves and amplify that effect so that there's no straight shot. I did originally try to do that, but we can swoop them more so to do that. So that's my request, that we, for the most part, stick with the landscape plan that I've provided, other than the more curvilinear paths. And I think we'll end up with a great project here either way.
Okay.
One of the things that John and I were also talking about, and what we're going to look and see if it works engineering-wise, is maybe to shift the rain garden that's there into that area as well, so that this way it kind of solves both processes. But I'm not going to say that it's a done deal. I have to check. We have to look at it. We have to do a test hole, just like everything else that we need to get done. But I mean, that would be a perfect way to deal with that as well. And that's all I have to say at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
What is the resulting, the depth of the buffer here from the water line?
50 feet. I have my scale. Pat, where were you pointing? So from the wetland.
Larry can't see.
So again, I've used a very curvilinear line. So that's 40 from the wetland, 50 from the water's edge. This gets down to about 35 there, 30.
From the wetland?
From the wetland.
And how much to the water?
It's 60 to the water here.
And Larry, you were saying that, and I guess, John, I'm question for you is, if the perk test pans out, is that the location of the rain garden?
It could be.
I'm just
we're saying that we can modify that. Of course we can.
I'm asking, which county, if
I
that's
think that's
something.
what Larry's offering as a fallback, although I think our first position is to keep this lawn.
Okay.
All right.
Where is your rain garden currently?
Right there.
Oh, just over there. Okay.
So the vegetation that's in this area right now is quite good. So your intent is to expand that sort of thick?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, expand it, and what's not there, what I did not notice there were the woody shrubs and small flowering trees and some shade trees in there. So we've introduced all of that.
Okay. Fair enough.
I
Other
think
agency
this is
questions?
Some of those plans that I think will result in a poster for how to improve the wetlands, and make it something beautiful and functional.
Okay. Any agency questions? Other questions or comments?
A quick one. So the spot that you're proposing to keep as lawn, that the curve that you have in there, that's just going to be mowed grass.
Yes.
But is there something, and is that more of a line of sight? Is that what you were saying? So they're getting a nice, the homeowner's getting a nice
the
view
homeowner's
of.
view of the water is out over this way. This is all tall trees. There's
Yeah.
another house across the lake here. So this is the expansive view, which is why this is such a valuable flow
Piece
of
of
lawn
lawn.
to.
But what I mean, essentially you could plant something native there that's low also, instead of just having mowed lawn,
Well,
right?
yes, and that's what we've done from here out. You know, we're using all kinds of ground covers, bearberry, things like that. So you look at the architecture of what is being proposed, you know, it's a house that I feel needs a little bit of lawn around it just to kind of anchor it and balance it.
Okay, fair enough. Public questions or comments? No? I'll make a motion to approve. I think that, I guess my feeling is that the planting plan is generous, and putting my landscape architect, or my architect hat on, not a landscape architect, but I can see the value of having a little more lawn space around there. So I will make a motion to approve. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? No? Okay. Okay. Next is 2017-094, 11 Dialstone Lane. Mike Radman for 11 Dialstone Lane LLC for redevelopment of a new family residence, drainage, grading, landscaping 18 feet from wetlands. Ms. Sesto, please.
Okay. Okay, this is another redevelopment of an existing residential parcel. There is a small Cape home on the parcel presently. The road end is the high end, and the lot dips down. There's a pond, swamp, wetland complex to the rear of the property off-site. The stone wall that marks the boundary of the property is about 18 feet, I think, and Dr. Dancer had indicated about 18 feet to that wetland boundary off-site. Once you hit that stone wall, it's all lawn for this property. The applicant's proposing to contain and alter the grades of the property with a retaining wall, which at this west end starts out at 1 foot, and by time you reach the rear of the property, it is a 5-foot retaining wall. There are 5 separate Coltech units to deal with the water associated with the redevelopment. So the comments that I had pertaining to this, 5 units, the extent of those units, you could group them into 3 or 2 for all it matters, but the extent of the units, that's an awful lot of bioretention for this 0.2 acre parcel, and a strong reliance on engineering solutions. I'm curious to what other alternatives there might be to reduce the amount of runoff generated, or what something else that's more passive than Coltech's that might be employed in this project. I'm curious to understand that the height of the retaining wall, is that a function of a desired elevation associated with the house, or is it the separating distance between the restrictive layer of the underlying soil to meet the base of those Coltech units, which is then driving the height of this fill? The one thing I think that we don't always pay attention to perhaps to the extent that we should, myself totally included in this, is the soil layer that is there now is rich in all kinds of microbial activities, invertebrate activity. It's all full-on life, and we're going to bury that with soil that potentially does not have that same rich community, certainly would not be an established community for a while. So that is something that we lose. So the plan doesn't seem to align with the The town's drainage plan, which speaks about the least amount of disturbance to property, and I'm interested in understanding how this plan, how the applicant feels this plan is responsive to those entities. The project narrative by the civil engineer states, quote, "No natural resources are on site," and I'm not sure what that is intended to mean. Dr. Danzer did submit a report and has submitted subsequently a more in-depth review of the proposal. The trees at the periphery of the project are of significant concern to me. As I stated, there's a narrow, naturally vegetated buffer left for this pond. The wetland's been squeezed by the residential development historically, so at least as this parcel is concerned, that's it. Wetland plants have typically shallow-rooted systems, which is consistent with the anaerobic conditions of the soil. We saw great evidence on site. Mr. Shundoff was at the site this afternoon. And I'm also concerned about the footing associated with that retaining wall and the severing of all the roots effectively to the west of the wall. With shallow-rooted plants, that's a stress that I feel uncomfortable with. And Dr. Danzer did, in his report as of today, as his is also a licensed arborist, felt that there would not be an issue with the trees, but I am interested in discussing that one further. There is a multi-trunk red maple which leans into the property, it's approximately here, and provides great canopy to this property, but more importantly to the wetland, and the proposal is to remove that four-trunked tree. The project narrative cites the grading as a result of the updated foundation requirements of the building code, but there's no further explanation associated with that, so I'm not clear as to what it is about the building code that is driving a 4-foot to 5-foot fill package associated with the residence. And I had requested the applicant submit alternatives with less manipulation and better use of the conditions as they are on the site, rather than consuming the site end to end effectively with retaining walls, fill, and structure. So with that, I am suggesting the agency delay action on the application, and I believe the team is here to discuss it.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Dean Martin, Grumman Engineering. I'm here representing the applicant on this proposal. And I did receive Ms. Sesto's staff report comments, and I'd like to offer some insight as to the design of the project. As you can see, there is an increase in the impervious surface on the property, requiring, in accordance with the Town of Greenwich Drainage Manual, we have to provide for zero increase runoff. The methodology that we chose, which was after a brief review with the engineering department, was to break the impervious surfaces into areas of less than 1,000 square feet. Each of the there's actually three Coltec systems which receive runoff from the new impervious surface. There's an area under the driveway which is a stone filtration system. It's not a Coltec, it's just a stone filtration system, which receives runoff from the driveway area. The Coltec, which is in the southeast corner closest to the proposed retaining wall, that is for footing drain water to be pumped into that system if, in fact, there is ever a high water table in the footing depth. The drain systems, because it's such a small property, it was decided that we could, if we break the impervious areas up into areas less than 1,000 square feet, going into each Coltech system, that would be in compliance with the drainage manual requirements. And that's the result of, and the plan that we presented, the result of that. The fill in the backyard and the 5-foot retaining wall, that's merely a fact that the owner wants to have a somewhat level backyard. That being said, also, if the proposed dwelling was a walkout, the same as what the existing property is, based on the building code requirement, if more than 30% of the foundation or the back area has more than 5 feet of exposed area above the grade plane, then the basement would count as a story, and he would only be allowed to put in the basement and the main floor. By putting in the retaining wall and filling the backyard, having a flat backyard, we were able to comply with the building zone requirements as far as height of the building go. And, you know, the fill area extends to within 5 feet of the rear property. Because the owner wants to have a somewhat level backyard, he doesn't want to have the backyard chopped up. It's not a very large backyard area, as you can see. So he wants to be able to have a usable backyard without a retaining wall in the middle. The retaining wall also has to be at least 5 feet beyond the foundation, or I'm sorry, at least 10 feet beyond the foundation in order to comply again with the zone requirements, which says that you can't have a retaining wall to help you aid in your grade plane analysis. So those are some of the factors that go into the plan as proposed. We are bringing the retaining wall 5 feet off the back line, which will in effect give result in an extra 5 feet of buffer to the off-site wetland. The statement that I made in my narrative as to no natural resources on site, really what I was trying to say was that this site had been developed previously. There was no natural areas, is really what I meant to say. The whole backyard had been developed. There was a pool in the backyard at one point. The lawn goes right down to the existing property line, to the stone wall that's on site. There was a driveway which went from the front of the property down along the side of the property and culminated into a garage, which is on the wetland side of the existing house. Under the new plan, the driveway would be in the front of the property. There would be no paved area in the back. And then just to comment on the existing survey that was done, the surveyor, because of the trees along the perimeter of the rear of the property were primarily off the site, they were not located on the survey, really for no other reason.
But we'll be seeing, they will be added to the plan?
If, I guess we can have the surveyor go back.
That would be my request, would be, because we're not seeing any of the, to the director's point, the potential impact of the retaining wall on the adjacent trees. We have nothing to react to here without seeing them.
Maybe a good segue into my participation. For the record, my name is Steve Danzer. I'm a soil scientist, a wetland scientist, and curiously enough, also an arborist. I don't always emphasize the arborist part of my certifications, but occasionally, such as this project, called upon to add that to my qualifications.
Could you speak to the mic, please?
Okay. In any case, regarding the trees, I just want to speak for a couple of minutes about the anticipated impact to those trees that Ms. Sesto has referred to. I went out there today and I identified all trees that were within proximity to that rear property boundary, which are also within proximity to the proposed retaining wall. I counted 7 trees. Only one of those 7 trees are actually arguably on this particular property. Actually, while I do that, you don't need to read this, but right now, because I'm going to essentially present it. But sorry, I should have pointed that out before. in any case, of the 7 trees, only actually 2 of the trees were actually near or actually on the property line and arguably part of the applicant's property. One was a multi-stemmed red maple, and the other one was I couldn't identify the species, it was some type of ornamental tree. In the page 2 of my report, I identified the size class and the distance to the proposed wall. Except for those 2 trees I just called out, the rest of the trees are up to 12 feet away from the property boundary, or rather from the distance to the proposed wall. There's only 2 trees that are of any substantial diameter. One is that red maple that we just referred to, and the second is there's another 30-inch red maple, which is 12 feet from the proposed wall. What I get from this is basically the only trees that's going to be impacted by the wall is the multi-stemmed red maple. And of that red maple, it has 4 stems. Each stem is roughly about 20 inch in diameter. It straddles the property boundary. Arguably, 2 of the front stems are either on or over the applicant's property. The other 2 stems start off on the adjacent property. Of the 2 that are shared by the applicant's property, one of them has a hollow stem and generally poses a hazard to the yard. The other leader, or rather the stem, appears to be under stress, as indicated by the architecture of the branching. So the prudent and the other factor to kind of consider is that it's clear that that root system, you can see it where it's kind of bubbling up on the surface, is going to be either adjacent or underneath where the wall is going to be. So it's clear that that wall is going to take out the root system to that. It's clear that 50% of that tree is not in good condition. So initially when I did my first narrative, we respectfully asked permission to take down that tree. One thing that kind of got lost in this iteration and coming before the commission is that we are proposing replacement plantings for the tree, up to 2 red maples, minimum of 2.3 to 3 inch caliper, planted 20 feet off center in what is now lawn, but is now going to be allowed to revert back to wild below the retaining wall. So we're basically looking towards the future on that. So anyway, in summary, I understand Ms. Sesto's concerns, but my evaluation was that the bulk of the trees that are under question are not going to be impacted by this wall, and the one major tree that will be, it is already a problematic tree, and we're respectively asking to take that one down and replant with smaller trees. And the final thing is what's also kind of been lost in the analysis of this is, on one hand, you kind of look at where the retaining wall is, and you're saying, God, this is really close to the property boundary, but the point is that it's not on the property boundary. You actually pulled it back 5 to 6 feet. So under existing conditions, we have lawn going all the way down to the property boundary. Under proposed conditions, we're actually adding 5 to 6 feet of what is existing lawn to be reverted back to forest to add to the buffer. So the way we kind of looked at this is that we're actually improving the site. If you look to the adjacent site to the south, they similarly have lawn going all the way down to, it's not a stone wall, it's a picket fence, and I imagine their property boundary is along that picket fence as well. So compared to what is going on to the site next door, which is very similar, we're actually improving the environmental quality of the site by going forward with the plan that we have before you today.
Well, I think it would be helpful, at least for me, to see those trees that you identified plotted out on the plan.
Okay, the question is
with an approximate canopy surround on that, so we can see how much of the canopies are being intersected by the retaining wall, hence the root systems.
Okay, the question we have is at how far do we need to go off site? Because that was kind of the initial issue with the surveyor the first time. Do you want us to go 12 feet off site?
I would go down to the edge of the standing water.
that's 35 feet off-site.
Well, your development is potentially impacting the off-site wetlands.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not quite sure that our survey has the ability to go that far onto someone else's property to do that type of mapping. I mean, a couple of feet I can see, but I think that's kind of
I think you could probably stand on your property boundary and look and approximate where they are.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be survey A2 accurate.
Right.
Because that's what I did. That's what I did today. Is I used a laser rangefinder.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that easily to measure the distance from the property line.
Okay.
Because right now, it's looking like there are no trees on the plan, so there's no impact. But if trees are coming down, and it is between your proposed development and the water, it has the potential to impact the wetland if those are coming down. I'd also like to see I see we have a section of the house. I'd like to see a site section going north to south through there, so we can see what the existing grade is and then where you're planning on filling. And then I'm not sure if I see you have the boulder retaining wall is what you're proposing here? Okay.
I would like to see alternatives that do away with that retaining wall. I know you're looking and you're saying, okay, this is one parcel. Taking 20 feet off of a wetland and building a wall, and if everybody does that all along that wetland, I cannot understand the argument that says that's no different than having, albeit lawn, not preferable, but an at-grade vegetation. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I can't comment on that, but the question that kind of lurks in the back of my mind is what is the impact, which is always the question is what is the impact to the wetlands? And I think in this particular case, the issue of concern is the applicant is proposing to put a retaining wall and backfill on existing lawn. So the question is, what is the impact to the wetlands? I think you brought up a good point. The impact isn't necessarily a direct impact to the wetlands. It may be potentially an impact to the wetland buffer, basically the edge. I respectfully introduced comments that went out there and analyzed that. My conclusion was there's one tree under question. I can understand that the need to continue to get this documented, and I've no problem with that. But I think at the end of the day, I think all we're going to be talking about is a multi-stemmed red maple. Where that particular retaining wall goes, to me, I mean, assuming you don't move it any closer, to me, it does not really affect the wetland in any way. It doesn't affect the wetland buffer in any way.
I disagree. I think you're looking at this as part of what this agency does is look at cumulative impacts. This wall has an impact to the wetland. It will be a change in water flow to the wetland. There's going to be a change in wildlife movement in and out. So you've got nutrient cycling changes, small. But then we know that the house next door is going to come in with the same application, and the one next door to that, and then this other direction, and now we have a wetland with a wall. And I can't believe, in my professional experience, that having a walled-in wetland, which we did away with those years ago, a walled-in wetland is just as good as having an at-grade lawn. I mean, this would be the second house. There's the house at the beginning, two houses where this has not yet occurred, and this house, and then go on down the street. And that's a walled wetland.
I'm not going to disagree with you, but I might mention that my observation is that these types of things do get approved every day. As you know, I was associated with an earlier project before this commission on Cutler Road, where essentially a wall was approved.
These two things are very different in nature, very different sites.
Okay.
We're talking about a new situation, and saying that the cumulative impact is inconsequential.
Well, I mean, I think realistically,
Or
we're looking...
not, or equal, actually, and in fact, even better. That having this site be walled is better than the way it is now.
Well, the other thing that I'm kind of having I'm kind of struggling with a little bit is, I understand, I mean, I totally understand where you're getting about the hell you don't want to compartmentalize the wetlands, but in this particular case, we have a house that is like 20, 25 feet from a road, so I'm not quite sure what we're compartmentalizing. You know, what it is, what's the natural resource that we're defending.
This is the second piece, arguably, in a walling off the wetland, which I don't think is the right direction to be going for wetland protection.
Right. So a prudent and feasible alternative would be a development that didn't have a retaining wall and maintain the existing grade.
Or, I understand the conundrum with the grade plane drives some decisions.
You currently
They
have
don't,
a house with a walkout basement, and the current owner does not want to have.
Right. So the grade plane doesn't require this, which I think is what we often hear from applicants, but this is the result. If this is the house I want, then the grade plane makes me do this. But perhaps the question is that the right house for this property? And then the grade plane might not be an issue. Or if I see there's a deck associated with the back of the house, maybe the retaining wall is closer to the house and there's a patio instead of a deck. I don't know all the details of the design of the house, but
true.
We get the drainage plan is driving these decisions. The grade plane is driving decisions, and the reality is it's the house that's driving these decisions, and this is what happens when you apply the drainage manual and the grade plane to that house. So I would encourage the applicant to take a step back and look at the house. And the expectations of the lot perhaps are not reasonable. As you said, it's a very small lot.
You say this is the second retaining wall in that wetlands?
The house that is up the street is 3 houses away. I don't know where the wetland boundary is, if there is even a wetland boundary back there. But it's the same grade down this side of the street. So we can readily see that this wetland does extend north and south of this parcel. I could not say the first parcel on the street is the wetland there or not. But I can tell you if the first one is walled and then the fourth one is walled, the 2 in between are going to be walled.
Yeah, I believe the wetland...
His question was, did we approve that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part. I don't know. I'd have to go back and check.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
We did.
There's a watercourse right behind that, just the same, maybe even closer than this one.
Any other questions for the applicant on this?
Yeah. Ms. Danzer? Under current conditions, is there sheet flow into the wetland from the backyard?
Not directly, because I mean the contour is definitely great in that direction, but there is a stone wall that roughly demarcates the western property boundary.
Is it dry laid or is it mortared?
It's dry laid.
So the water goes through it?
Well, there's a little bump up. I mean, the water eventually does go through, but it impedes the direct, all I'm saying is it impedes the direct flow into the wetland.
And putting in the retaining wall and the fill is going to change the flows into the wetlands?
It looks like it.
Excuse me, Dean Martin, Grumman Engineering. There's still going to be a positive grade from the backyard, from the back of the house down towards the retaining wall. There still will be sheet flow going that way.
But not the same.
It's going to be a little bit different, that's correct.
It's going to be different, and the temperature is going to be different by the time it gets there?
It probably
So you
will.
are going to have an impact in the wetland, direct impact, both in terms of volume and in terms of temperature.
My opinion would be that I don't anticipate that happening.
We just heard evidence that it will happen.
Well, I'm not going to put words in the mouth of Mr. Martin, but I believe he didn't testify that there was going to be a thermal impact. This is the one thing you have to understand. This is a small site.
Yeah, it's an extremely small site. It's
Yeah.
even undersized for the area, for the,
Yeah, and
for the zoning.
And the proposed house is more or less over the existing footprint. What they're asking for is not an extension, a great extension. I mean, there's some bump outs, but overall, it's not a huge redevelopment of the site.
Well,
I'm totally in agreement.
Yeah,
The biggest alteration to the landform is the filling in the retaining wall, not the
That's an
position
alteration
of
to the site,
house.
though.
It's a major alteration to the site.
What is what's the current depth of the basement, and what is the basement going to be? Are we excavating down to,
The basement right now is level with the backyard, obviously with
Right.
an 8-foot ceiling. And the proposed basement would be an 8-foot ceiling.
but it will start deeper than where it is now?
No, the finished floor is going to be higher than the existing finished floor by about a foot or so.
Okay.
So
All right.
it's going to be roughly the same. The basement would be roughly the same level as the
Okay.
existing
And the
basement.
water table in this area is,
In the back of the property, down halfway between the rear of the house and the property line, the water table is about 30 to 36 inches below grade.
okay. So is there any chance of needing dewatering of the new foundation?
Not based on our soil testing. The front of the property was basically gravel material, sand and gravel, down to the depth that we excavated.
Okay.
We do have, as a precautionary measure, we do have sump pumps. The builder puts sump pumps in every building. Because we have a sump pump, we do have to have a discharge point for it to go, thus the Coltec system in the back of the property.
Mhm.
But it's not anticipated that there is going to be water in that basement, at that basement level.
So, but you're creating a Coltec specifically for the sump pump?
Correct, as part of the requirement of the drainage manual.
Okay, as opposed to it being just discharged at grade?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the drainage manual requires a Coltec for a sump pump, as opposed to discharging at grade? Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions, or public comments or questions on this?
Oh, I have, sorry, one. The sweet gum tree off the northeast corner. I didn't see that in your list. It's quite a large tree.
I'm not, to be honest, I'm not quite sure what tree you're referring to. Maybe I missed it. It's on the north?
Yeah, it's off the north, I forgot, so west, east, so northeast corner. It's probably right about there. The sweet gum balls are on the property. The burrs, is that what you call them?
So
Jay?
it's,
Yeah.
Maybe we don't want to say what you call them.
all right.
How many feet approximately off the property boundary, the stone
think-
wall?
Well, if the sweet gum balls are on the property, then the drip line is
Is on the
obviously
property.
on the property as well.
Yep.
I'll take a
It's a big
second
one.
look. Yeah,
It's a big fatty.
Unless I misidentified on my field notes, maybe that's, I mean, I identified a 30-inch red maple. Maybe that was supposed to be a sweet gum. That was 12 feet off, so I'll re-verify.
Yeah, okay. Very good. Okay, any public questions or comments on this application at this point? I'll make a motion to delay. Is there a second?
A second.
All in favor? All right. Okay, thank you. See you next month. Next is 2017-096, 15 Stonebrook Lane, Joseph F. Rizzoli, P.E. for Darlow Ursage, perhaps, for expansion of a driveway, other hardscape improvements, and a bioretention system 10 feet from wetlands.
The applicant has requested continuation.
Okay, very good. Next is 2017-098, 38 Birch Lane, Soundview Engineers and Land Surveyors, LLC, for TKS Group, LLC, for redevelopment of a single-family residence, septic, pool, patio, drainage, grading, landscaping, and driveway modifications 24 feet from wetlands. Ms. Sesto, please.
Okay. This, again, consists, it's the theme of the evening, raising and reconstructing a single-family dwelling. This site actually is right across the pond from the 15 Beechwood that we saw in the last few months. The current limit of hardscape is 38 feet from a lawned wetland. Again, consistent, that lawned wetland. And the proposed limit is 23 feet from that same, 23 feet of hardscape from that same wetland. The use of porous asphalt out front eliminates the need for structural stormwater, and there's only one level spreader 20 feet off of the wetland boundary. The on-site resources consist of, we've got the pond out here, a pretty good, albeit narrow, it is a substantive buffer associated with the pond, and then a lawned wetland area. There was no evidence of goose droppings on the site, which is a testament to the very strong buffer, and quite a difference from the Beechwood with a much lesser buffer. The wetland is 55 to 85 feet deep, and lawn consumes all but maybe 5 to 7 feet of that. So there's opportunity for expansion of that buffer and to do more good than the existing buffer already does. The buffer that's there now has a good assemblage of forbs, alder, and rose. The questions and recommendations, I've got the rear yard, since it is fully lawned, there's an opportunity to strike a better balance between the redevelopment of the house and in turn also redevelop the lawned wetland back into a better functioning wetland. I'm suggesting a buffer of 20 feet in depth on average. I believe the plan that was originally proposed by Bill Kenny showed a swath cut into the buffer, got my own eye, here, which, again, I have no issue with people getting access down to their pond. And even if there was an area that was cleared out, but then buffer comes up from behind it, and then a path comes into the side, the difference between the goose impacts on this property versus the others is textbook. And I would really hate to see this one be yet another safe harbor for the geese. So access along the pond is terrific. I think it just needs to be reconfigured. With those recommendations, should the applicant address those satisfactorily, I have conditions of approval for the agency's consideration.
Okay, thank you, Pat.
Brian Muller, Soundview Engineers. Bill Kenny couldn't make it here tonight, so I spoke with him just before, and we will coordinate with Pat Sesto on final construction drawings, planting plans, all per her staff comments, as well as the engineering comments from Scott Marucci. Everything has been revised and resubmitted already. As Pat has done a good job with getting me staff reports and comments and everything well ahead of time, so I was able to make these revisions and resubmit. I'm confident engineering will sign off on it, as well as the planting plan. We would like to keep, a little opening there, but as Pat said, we can do something behind it as well to keep the geese from coming up into the lawn. Maybe like a little path or something down there, which we can work out with Pat, with final construction plans and a final planting plan. Bill and the client were both willing to do a 20-foot average buffer alongside, I believe, on this far side here. It's actually like 25 feet, but we can mitigate that on the other side as well, kind of balance it out. As well as doing maybe some meadow grasses up higher to keep the geese from actually coming up into the large lawn wetland area. In the back of the property, actually, the only reason why we have a level spreader back there is because Scott Marucci and I discussed it, and we thought it'd be less of an impact to just allow the patio to sheet flow into some deep sump catch basins, which will collect any sediment on the patios, and then the excess runoff will overflow to the level spreader instead of having to do some type of water quality rain garden back there, which will be, right on top of the wetlands, or even, some filling into the wetlands. So we were able to get away with that. And then the rest, all the asphalt and the porous asphalt's all in the front yard. Most of the development's in the front, as well as the septic's on the side yards. Best place we could put it. That's basically what dictated the whole position of the lot.
Okay.
And other than that, we're willing to comply with all staff comments.
Okay. Talk to me about you're limiting 5 trees. Is that for just view or?
Which trees? Most of those.
I'm talking about
I think they're right at the new patio, or right at the,
these ones down.
Are just because they're going to be destroyed if we tried to keep one just below that patio wall. We also put that patio wall in so we didn't have to fill in upstream of that wetland area there. We tried to, I think those walls are 2 feet tall, maybe 2.5. Again, it was just so that we didn't have to fill in that backyard. We really tried to keep everything. The front of the house is also sitting on the front setback. So, again, we worked as best we could, and I did as many BMPs as I could, including that large back out area is all porous asphalt, so no runoff off there is going to affect the wetland.
Okay. Any agency questions? The applicant on this, public questions or comments in the room? No? Someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve with the conditions provided.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Jay seconds, all in favor? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and finally, 2017-099, 363 Riversville Road, Redness and Mead, for Greenwich Council Boy Scouts of America for reconfiguration of trails and construction of a boardwalk in and adjacent to wetlands. Ms. Sesto.
okay. So this is a request to reconfigure a woodland trail. There's a land swap being proposed between the Boy Scouts and the Round Hill Country Club. And the plan includes rerouting of the trail adjacent to a wetland as well as a boardwalk traversing a nice hardy swamp. Mr. Shondoff, again, was out at this site as well. Overall, I think the reworking of the trail seems to be an appropriate response to the changing lot lines and of no detriment to the wetland. The crossing of the wetland, the boardwalks, of course, can be constructed in any number of ways, some more intrusive than the other. Interesting for this particular project, they are proposing a product from the Wickcraft company, which effectively uses pan feet, so the uprights of the boardwalk rest on plates and just go onto the wetland, which I'm pretty interested in seeing how that's done. It has the potential to be probably the most, short of floating a boardwalk on pontoons, even that would probably have more impact than this. So the Wickcraft company has been doing this for quite a long time, and their website shows a number of pretty large sites, so it seems to be a well-used product, although I've not seen it. The wetland, because it is a hardy wetland, the trees can be somewhat dispersed in areas, so it's not easy to get from one side to the other without losing any trees. And I did request that the application speak more specifically to the logistical elements of installing the boardwalk. That information was provided, and I think will be handed out to you shortly, so I won't discuss that any further. And I just need to have some bit more information with regards to the relocated upland trail. Will there be any benching involved? It does follow the outskirts of sort of a knob, comes around and then down to the wetland. But I don't know if any benching is going to be required, what's the width of the trail, and how that will be accommodated. There is one lookout over, or resting area over the swamp, which could be pretty cool. It's a neat swamp. So I have provided conditions of approval if the agency is inclined. Those be for your consideration. And seems like a overall pretty good project. I do generally support the idea, even though the boardwalk going through a wetland has its obvious impacts of the intrusion of a structure. I think that on balance of having, in this case, Boy Scouts have access to this resource and hopefully having a greater appreciation for what one might find out in the middle of a swamp is a reasonable trade-off.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Brian McMahon, licensed professional engineer with Redness and Mead on behalf of Greenwich Council, Boy Scouts of America. I'm joined tonight by John Conte of Conte & Conte Landscape Architects, as well as Eric Lindberg of the Greenwich Council BSA. And I think Pat summarized what we're proposing out here very well. It is the subject or the result of what is proposed to be a land transaction between the Boy Scouts and the Round Hill Club, the property immediately adjacent to and south of the Boy Scout property. It's about an 11-acre transaction that's proposed, and on those 11 acres, as well as on the remainder of the Boy Scout property, there is a series of trails used both by the Boy Scouts themselves, as well as in part by the Greenwich Riding Trail Association, horse trails. And on the 11 acres, there are quite a few of those trails on there. Again, some by the Scouts, some by the Horse Riding Trail Association. And as part of this, and the reason why we are here tonight is because we are going to be proposing to relocate an equivalent amount of trails being displaced on the 11 acres back onto the remaining 78 acres of the Boy Scout property. And with that, of course, is the proposed pan-foot boardwalk that will traverse the swamp, the wetland, from one end to the other. It's about 200 feet. We visited the site with Pat and visualized the particular location where we're crossing. Some of the relocated trails will be within the 100-foot upland review area. Pat did issue her report and had a couple of comments, comment number 4 and number 5. I just passed out to you what Pat was referring to earlier, and I sought to provide additional information with respect to the boardwalk system itself, how it will be installed. It's an interesting concept. John can speak to it more if you'd like, but it's a system with a frame and decking that allows for very little intrusion, physical intrusion, certainly no intrusion with machinery within the wetland, but very little intrusion, and almost fold out across as you go and lay the decking down as you go, and you work your way across the wetland.
Okay. I have a question about the, and maybe it's for John, but the actual, will the boardwalk affect, oh, here we go, I think I just found it. What kind of light regimen will reach underneath the boardwalk itself? Are there particular gaps? I guess my concern there is die off underneath, and
it definitely will be blocked. It'll be a shady zone underneath there. It is slatted, and it's going to be elevated to less than 30 inches. So there will be
a change underneath.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there any boardwalk there now?
No.
None of the trails?
No.
And what's compelling inclusion of the boardwalk now?
Right now, the system of trails that the Boy Scouts enjoy traverse around the wetland area, and this 11 acres that they're transferring title to the Round Hill Club will preclude that.
So without the boardwalk, you can't use these trails?
We can't use both sides of it. It can't be a continuous loop, so to speak, as it is now, from either side, the north and the south side of the wetland.
I noticed from the map that you gave us that some of the trails currently cross onto the club's property? No, I know. Yeah, there's a little loop there. And I'm curious as to why you feel you have to, I mean, have you gone to the club and asked for permission to maintain the trails?
Actually, just as a point of disclosure, we represent, Reynolds and me, we represent the Round Hill Club as well here tonight on protecting their interests here, but also on other, we have worked for them before. And I would point out that the source of the information here is, in coordination with staff, is GIS-based information. It will be.
I'm sorry, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking whether you can have the right or the ability to use the existing trails after the transfer.
Yes, the trails, some of the trails, including the one you refer to.
Yeah.
Is used by and will continue to be used by the Greenwich Riding Trail Association.
Okay, and I assume if it can be used by the Riding Trails Association, it can still be used by the Boy Scouts.
I think that the Boy Scouts have a desire to bring the trails back onto the remaining 78 acres that will result from this.
Well, are the Boy Scouts going to continue using the trails or not?
I think the purpose, I'm not sure if I may, what Elliot's getting to is the purpose of this relocation is in response to the land transaction, the club would like the trails to be off their property.
Okay, obviously the horses do a lot more damage than the Boy Scouts. Are the horses going to be moved too? Are we just looking at phase one of this?
No, this is not a horse bridge.
No, I mean, but just bear with me. Right now, you've got trails that are shared by the Boy Scouts and the Riding Trails Association. Big ones that go down there. You're telling me that the Boy Scouts are going to move, but the Riding Trails Association are not.
That is correct.
So the trails are going to stay, and the Boy Scouts are just going to create new trails, including going through the
Yeah,
wetlands.
it's, I guess to your point, I don't see the need for the boardwalk then.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I was getting
I
mean, are we missing something?
Wait a minute. If, John,
Missing something here?
Gentlemen, if you come in and you say,
I don't hear a compelling argument for the boardwalk.
if you want to come in and say, in order to make proper use of the property that the Boy Scouts have, and for educational purposes, they want to be able to go through the wetlands, that's fine. But to tell me I'm going to move the trails, when I'm not going to move the trails, it just leads to confusion. I'm just not that smart.
The Boy Scouts want to consolidate their trails on their own property. I'm not sure of all the logistics behind the land transaction, but it definitely requires that the Boy Scouts trail activity comes off of the Round Hill Club's property in order to do that, which then severs the trail so that it cannot connect with a rather extensive trail system that the Scouts have.
Right.
So we did look at this with an eye towards exactly what you just mentioned, in that this is a great opportunity to add an educational element through the wetland. As a matter of fact, we're putting a little overlook right here. We had first thought about making a wider area in the middle of the wetland, and then we thought better of that idea and decided, let's put the overlook before you go. The thought is that a classroom of students or scouts would stop, kind of have a little lecture about what they're about to see, and then they'll single file or double file go across the wetland and look at it and then regroup on the other side. So there's definitely an educational aspect to this, but it is also very definitely predicated on taking the scout activity off the club's property.
I would imagine it's a liability issue that the club is interested in, right? Yeah, they don't want boys,
They don't want boys. Never mind.
throwing.
But that's part one of the question. Part two of the question is, what's going to happen to the Riding Trails Association and their trails?
Yeah, but we didn't really.
Right, and are they going to want to use these same trails through the Boy Scouts area? Now, are they being thrown off of this parcel as well? And is this just the first step, if you will?
Yeah, again, John and I are not privy to the details of the land transaction deal, but my understanding is that the Riding Trail Association will be able to continue using the trail that they use now. Some of them...
But that'll be the club's decision with regard to the acquisition, right?
I believe so, yes.
And this is not any first step to come back and say, now we want a horse trail across the wetland. That is not part of any conversation.
Right.
And this will be, there'll be good signage on this that says.
So the trail that we walked down, my understanding that portions of that were going to be abandoned.
Yep.
When we came off of Round Hill Road.
Right.
That once you entered onto the land that was going over to the country club. I'm sorry, just where's the watercourse crossing? That's where that old dam?
The stone wall is just before you come around. Remember, we had actually first walked from this point to this point,
Yeah.
and you took us around that roundabout there.
But I'm saying, so when we came off the road, you come down and you sweep the outskirts of this, up high, this wetland.
Yep.
With the trail. So there's no portions of the trail that are being abandoned when these are being moved? I mean, the move to me suggests something comes and something leaves.
Yeah, that's a fair question. This part of the trail right here, right now, is a shared portion of the trail.
Okay.
This part of the trail here is designated as now only Rhino Trail Association. None of these are being physically
Taken out of service.
Because all of them here, at least in part, are used by the granite riding trails. These blue areas here, and here are what would be the new Boy Scout trails. And you might ask, well, why there and why that shape? One of the important things, a very important thing to the Scouts Trail is the length.
Is what? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Length.
I'm sorry. A very important thing to the Scouts Trail is the length of the trail. And so what they might lose from on this 11 acres of trail, we are proposing to replicate in kind, in length, elsewhere, which is what's represented in blue on this plan.
So this area where the new trail kind of doubles over.
It's for length.
Is for length.
Okay, so, but this portion in the middle is coming out?
No, that's part of the, first of all, this is on the, this is the thing that is not within the 11 acres here. And that is horse riding trails now. Here, and this is combined scout and horse riding trail here. They are not proposed to be removed.
And the
It seems
trail-
kind of peculiar, though, to have, I mean, from a trail user's experience, there's a lot going on there.
Well, again, they'll be blazed, with little markers. It's kind of a wooded area. There's the GRTA arrows are these little red arrows, so they're separately marked. And the trail work that we're doing ourselves for this project is really very, very minimal impact. It's almost like raking away a leaf path so that it can be seen and then marked. There is not any machine construction going in there to build trails. They're really footpaths.
Single track sort of.
Yeah.
And to answer your earlier question, Matthew, I don't think there's any intention for benching the grades there.
Don't need that, okay.
These are constructed trails.
And currently, the Boy Scouts don't run horses on any of their trails? I'm looking at you. Okay. So it will be foot traffic only?
Do you consider anything other than this Whitcraft? I mean, is that what you
Yes.
consider to be state-of-the-art?
Yes, absolutely. We're excited about this method. We started off thinking that there would be helical coils, excavated piles, built decks, and we just kept pressing to find lighter and lighter footprint. And when we researched and came across this product, it just seemed like best of all worlds.
And is it cedar, is it pressure treated?
Yeah,
What is
the
the?
framing is galvanized steel with an anticipated lifespan of over 50 years in a submerged condition. The decking you can buy different deckings, considering we are specifying the teak, so it will be sustainably harvested, and that has also a 50-year longevity. So This should go down and
Okay.
be there for a long time.
So natural raw wood won't be stained or oiled or anything like that over, okay.
Sounds like a real Greenwich construction.
Well, they're all over, these elements have been put all over the country. This Whitcraft is in Rhode Island.
No, it was the teak part.
Right, okay.
Okay.
It just makes more financial sense, actually, because it doesn't have to be replaced.
Right.
As quickly.
Okay, any other questions? Public questions or comments? No?
Yeah, just a question. When we walked through from Round Hill Club Road, the path that we took all the way down before you hit the blue turnoff, you're not doing anything there at all. Just seemed rather odd when we were walking through this nice wooded area that there's asphalt in there.
Yeah. There are little patches of that I presume showed up after somebody got stuck with a horse.
It gets very muddy after it rains down.
Yeah.
Very muddy. Okay, I'll make a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? No? Okay, thank you. Good luck. Okay. I will make a motion to receive applications 1 through 9 inclusive on the yellow agenda issued this evening. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Benton seconds, all in favor. And finally, we have 4 violations. We have 11 agent approvals this evening. Are there any agency or public questions or comments on any of the agent approvals that require further examination? Okay, hearing none, we will move along to violations. We have 3 tonight. The first is cease and correct order 2017-12 for Elena Girdovinka? Okay, close enough. 30 Sherwood Avenue, unauthorized removal of trees and other vegetation from buffer areas. Doreen, please.
This was a clearing violation of trees, and the homeowners have been in contact multiple times with staff. They did have a family emergency and requested that this item be postponed to the next agency meeting in August.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there a motion to delay? Or we just have to punt it? Motion to delay.
Okay.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Okay. Next is cease and correct order 2017-13 for Jeffrey and Kristen Paradise, 5 Glendale Street, unauthorized removal of shrub and other vegetation from watercourse and buffer areas.
I'm going to quickly read in the record of documents. We have site photos dated July 12th, 2017, the 2008 GIS map, cease and correct order issued July 17th, 2017, and the violation summary issued July 17th, 2017. So the property owner, Jeff Paradise, called into staff and explained that he just recently purchased the property and he had some landscapers go in to do some cleaning, and they may have gone a little overboard and cleared out vegetation along the watercourse. Staff inspected the site and found that about a 5-foot wide swath of vegetation was removed along a watercourse. That's about 140 feet long. All the trees remain in place. There's also on the opposite side of the watercourse another section that's pie-shaped, maybe 700 square feet. Had also been cleared of shrubs and brush. Cease and correct order was issued. Staff is recommending that the cease and correct order stay in place and that an application be submitted by the 25th of August or a violation be put on the land record. And I believe Jeff Paradise is here to speak on that.
Hi, thanks for letting me speak.
When we bought the prop.
Homeowner? You didn't identify.
I'm Jeff Paradise. I own 5 Glendale Street. If you would go back, in April, we received a letter at 5 Grove Street, where we live now, on the same stream or brook or whatever what you're calling it. David Portugal owns that property. We were told that there was some debris. I have the letter that we received from them, from Mr. Klaus. We took pictures of it. We cleared it all out. So when we moved into 5 Glendale, we pretty much did the same exact thing that we did at 5 Grove Street. We did it at 5 Glendale. We may have gone a little bit taking out some poison ivy because we want to plant and make it, our backyard, make it really beautiful and put, what's indigenous to the area. So we are fully wanting to comply. I spoke to my friend, Mike Chambers, who you may know. He said, stop what you're doing, you idiot, and call Doreen, which I did, and said, hey, look, I may have overstepped my bounds here, and what should I do? Please come out. I don't want you to come out. I want to say, hey, look, this is what I did. We fully want to comply. I talked to Larry from SC Minor, and we will put in the, apply for what we need to do for the planting. We did earmark some money anyways when we purchased the house because it was such in disrepair. There was so much garbage, from the playground next door, because it's Coscob School. There was a lot of garbage, which we cleaned up. There was old tires in the water, so we kind of cleared out the water. So I'm totally guilty. We did do this to but we will comply to whatever you say, and we want to fix it because we don't want to be in ill favor with the committee. So thank you for letting me speak.
I mean, being friends with Mike Chambers won't strike against you.
He said stop what you were doing. I immediately stopped. I put down my tools and I called Doreen and I was like, please, I don't, as a new a new property owner, I didn't want to be. I would want to be anywhere else right now.
So you know what you got to do next, right? You got to get.
Yes, I've talked to Mike. I will be fully in compliance, and we want to plant and make it. We want to take out all the poison ivy, and we want to put in to make it so that our kids can go in the backyard with no problems.
Yep.
You'll be able to do this by August?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very good. Okay. Someone make a motion.
Motion to maintain cease and correct and certificate of violation until the application is put in.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thank you for coming in. Cease and correct order 2017-14 for Regina Kudoyorova, 30 Vineyard Lane, unauthorized ground disturbance and wall reconfigured 25 feet from a wetland.
The record of documents. A copy of the wetlands declaration dated November 1st, 2004. Copy of the proposed site plan received August 18th, 2004, and as-built received September 21st, 2005, in relation to application 2004-115. Photos dated July 12th, 2017. Notice of violation issued July 12th, 2017. Stop work order issued July 13th, 2017. Letter dated July 13th, 2017. Cease and correct order issued July 18th, 2017. And violation summary issued same date, July 18th, 2017. Staff was alerted that there was some activity occurring within the wetland buffer on property. When staff arrived, they found workers were reconstructing a retaining wall that was previously designated to delineate the wetland. There was excavation machinery on the northern, within the northern buffer to the wetland. There was no evidence of tree removal, but there was some minor disturbance to the ground cover. Silt fencing was installed. It was in good shape. Staff spoke with the homeowner. They've quickly working to correct it. There is a cease and correct order in place. Staff's recommending that the application be submitted by the 25th of August or place a certificate of violation on the land records.
Thank you, Doreen. It's always a pleasure to end the evening with you, Larry.
Thank you, sirs, and everybody else. The topography has already been had, so I know where the wall is. We finished it today. Obviously, you'll have an application in. The homeowner just asked to have the driveway a little bit more space for the driveway because they were nervous, and they decided to move the wall, and somebody, it got called in. We'll prepare an application as well as the previous.
They were tearing down the existing wall and moving it?
That's all they did. They just moved it about 8 feet. They moved it about 8 feet. I don't know that. I don't know the exact dimensions because right now it's still zeros and ones in the computer. I'll know in the morning. It'll be better. But you will have an application before the deadline date as requested, and we'll move forward with that way with the restoration plan.
So was it the wall of demarcation feature from a previous application?
Yes, it was.
Okay, that's what it was. Okay.
Just curious, you said they finished the wall today?
No, they finished the topography today. They stopped work. They're not doing any work.
This was just
the builder asked me if I could request that they finish it because it's only about another 30 feet to finish. And I said, you're not doing anything at all whatsoever until the agency tells us what we're doing. And what was finished was the survey crew being out there locating the wall so I can say, here it is today, here's where it was a week and a half ago, or whatever it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Motion to maintain cease and correct.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Hey, can I make the last motion to release bonds?
Yes, absolutely.
The unnecessary motion to release bonds.
Unnecessary second.
All in favor of this unnecessary motion? Very good.
One more item before we can skedaddle. If we're up to that. If you recall, 47 Valley Drive, we had the meadow restoration project that was in cooperation with the Land Trust and the neighbors at Georgetown.
Right.
And for those of you who are out the site, you recall that you go up and there's that bench formed where the driveway used to be, and it's somewhat steep there, drive somewhat steep. The meadow guy is asking if they can smooth the average of those two slopes. It's not bringing any fill onto the site to make a better area for the meadow, a more consistent grade. Is it something you would consider a field change or not?
I'm sorry, so they want to regrade?
The bench from the driveway, they just want to not have the bench anymore. So
it goes up, stops.
It's up and down, yep.
Up.
So they want to smooth that just by...
Will it have any impact to the wetland?
No, it will not. It does not. It drains alongside the wetland, not to the wetland. No.
I consider that a field change.
Okay.
Sense of the
That
agency.
will make them happy.
Now, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Today, during the heavy rainstorm, I drove along those streets that are upland, and they keep changing name as they go.
Right,
from
just to
Glenville
mess with
Road
people,
over to
yeah.
Putnam. 44 Upland is putting in a new lawn, and it was just, the mud was just pouring down onto the Glenville Road. So there's no erosion controls, anything there.
Okay.
Maybe you guys can take.
We will follow up on it.
I'm sure the homeowners are probably at home watching today, so you can just tell them.
Hello there.
Okay. Okay, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone watching at home.